This is Bernie Black. Bernie is the Nicholas D. Chabraja Professor at Northwestern University. He has positions at Pritzker School of Law, at Northwestern, the Kellogg School of Management, Department of Finance, and the Institute for Policy Research. Bernie's research areas include health policy and medical malpractice, empirical methods for causal inference, law and finance, and international corporate governance. He'll be talking about all those things today. I'm just joking. We'll be talking about Israel today. Bernie's the founding chairman of the annual conference on empirical legal studies, a founding editor of the Journal of Law, Finance, and Accounting, and has run since 2010 an annual workshop at Northwestern on research design for causal inference. Bernie is among the leading empirical legal scholars in the United States with over 150 published articles and over, is this a typo? No, I'm just kidding. No. I know. Over 35,000 citations on Google Scholar. Bernie and his family lived in Israel from 2017 to 2019, became Israeli citizens, and they return there each year and have many friends and colleagues there. He and Kate, his wife, Kate's also a professor at Northwestern, and they recently returned from several weeks in Israel. They go there annually to teach at various universities in Israel. And as I mentioned, they're members of Ezra-Habonim, the Niles Township Jewish congregation, and Bernie is a regular attendee. For those of you who come on Friday nights, a very regular attendee at our Friday night services. So, with no further ado, Professor Bernie Black. Very different. No. Okay, so I'll just use this notes.
So thank you, Rabbi Weil. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'll skip the background on our knowledge about Israel because the rabbi already covered that. I gave part one of this talk almost exactly a year ago. I never thought the Israel-Hamas war would last this long. Neither did most Israelis. I will try to speak about the Israeli perspective on the war as best I understand it, and there's not a single perspective, so I'll try to cover the waterfront. I'm going to avoid saying much about Israeli politics or U.S. politics. I'm going to try to speak for 20 to 25 minutes, cover a lot of ground, skip over some very important topics for lack of time, and then open up for questions. I'll try to save my personal views for the Q&A. Okay, so over the last year, a lot of good has happened, some not so good. Much is still unknown. Much is still rapidly changing. Let me start with what our visit was like this year versus a year ago. So when we visit Israel, we rent an Airbnb in Tel Aviv. Since October 7th, we've chosen to pay extra to get an apartment with a mamad, an in-apartment bomb shelter. That came in handy. During our last trip, the Houthis in Yemen regularly shot Iran-supplied rockets at Tel Aviv, usually in the middle of the night to awaken and annoy as many Israelis as possible. One landed in Jaffa, maybe 2 kilometers from our apartment. Thankfully, didn't kill anyone. One hit a kindergarten in a Tel Aviv suburb, which was empty at the time. Most were intercepted. People without mamads went to basement shelters or sometimes just to stairwells. We had the unique experience of going to see a play performed in an underground bomb shelter. Why there? Well, the space was safe and it was easy to rent. A bit crowded though. Bomb shelters are built to be strong but not large. Every public indoor space in Israel has a bomb shelter. Every hotel. Many apartments have mamads. Google Maps tells you the location of nearby shelters in case you need to find one on short notice, and I assure you that notice will be short, 90 seconds or less. Only in Israel is it crucial to have bomb shelters everywhere and strong anti-missile defenses. I have 2 rocket alarm systems on my Israeli phone in case one doesn't work. They've started going off again after being quiet for a couple of months. Otherwise, much closer to normal. Hezbollah was no longer shooting rockets at northern Israel. We were able to take weekend hiking groups in the weekend hiking trips in the north with our usual Russian-Israeli hiking groups. While driving in the north, GPS didn't advise us as often as a year earlier that we were in Beirut and the route to our destination went through Damascus. While walking in southern Tel Aviv, Google Maps didn't tell us that we had been teleported to Cairo, unlike the year before. I did enjoy the sense of humor of the IDF people who scrambled the GPS signals. For the classes we taught at Reichman University this year, a smaller but still significant percentage of students were not there because they were miluim in the reserves. So much has happened for the better. Go ahead.
So, Bernie, before you continue, so just to clarify, the GPS signals are scrambled purposely by the IDF? Yes. Right, okay.
Yes.
And you still have on your phone currently, so when you're here in Skokie or Evanston or Chicago, you are getting those alarms about incoming rockets, even though you're
Yes.
many thousands of miles away?
Yes.
Got it, okay.
The internet works.
So tell us about what is happening. What's on the good side?
So from a military perspective, Israel is in a far, far better place than a year ago for a variety of reasons. It has full-blown U.S. support versus the half-hearted support that it had last year. Think what you want about President Trump's actions in the U.S., but he and his team have been solidly pro-Israel, and for Israelis, that is very welcome. Israel has largely eliminated the Hezbollah threat in the north in amazing fashion, including the beeper operation, the grim beeper, some call it, killing the entire Hezbollah command from Nasrallah down, destroying a large percentage of the Hezbollah rockets, pushing Hezbollah back from the Lebanese border, and doing all this without a single major casualty event inside Israel. Syria was unexpected good news. They are now weak and will no longer be the path through which Iran supplies rockets and weapons to Hezbollah. The broader Iranian axis of evil is much weaker. Israel today is entirely capable of eliminating Hamas as a political and military force in Gaza, if only it has the will. Hamas is cut off from resupply because Israel went into Rafah at the southern end of Gaza, despite strong opposition from the Biden administration. Israel now controls the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Egypt and Gaza, and has stopped weapons smuggling from Egypt. Israel now has the luxury of time because Hamas can't rearm. And I can't overstate how important that is. Hamas cannot rearm as long as Israel controls the Egypt-Gaza border.
Can I ask you a question, Bertie, at this point? So you mentioned the previous Biden administration at one point, early on after October 7th, Israelis were referring to President Biden as Uncle Joe, right, because of the supports. There's a lot of time that's passed since then. So when you say that the Trump administration has been so solidly behind Israel, which many would agree, is that where the Israel public basically is, sort of throughout this political spectrum, do you think?
Yes, the last polls I saw before the U.S. election were 80% Israeli support for Trump. And for good reason, right? To me, going into Rafah and cutting off the border was critical, and Israel did that against very strong U.S. opposition, which I think slowed down the decision for several months. Eventually, Israel went in anyway very successfully.
Is there a general consensus that Hamas will not rearm and is much degraded, especially as a political entity? I mean, Hamas is obviously trying to demonstrate that it's not that degraded, that it's still very strong. It has these shows of force internally within Gaza. Is that a pretty well agreed to? Do folks agree that that's actually the case with Hamas? Or is that more of a hope?
So militarily, yes. Israel is back in Gaza, not in full force, but in major force. I have not heard of an Israeli casualty in the last 2 weeks. Hamas is hiding. They aren't fighting anymore. Maybe they can't. Maybe they're holding back a little. But militarily, Hamas is much weaker. This is why Hamas so badly wants to trade hostages for reopening the border so that they can rearm. Right now, they can't. Politically, the Gazans don't like Israel. They used to like Hamas, majority. They don't like Hamas anymore. That doesn't tell us whom they will like or who will govern Gaza, but Hamas is very much weakened politically as well. There have been very recently the first open Gazan protests against Hamas. Those are dangerous. Hamas kills its opponents. They've killed a few of the demonstrators. A couple of the clans are now shooting back. Where that goes, we don't know, but that's new and it might turn out to be important. I didn't say anything yet about Iran, and I won't. Israel removed Iran's air defenses in response to Iran's missile attacks last year. When and whether Israel and the US, hopefully both, go after the Iranian nuclear capability, I don't know. We will all stay tuned. But the big question for Israel is not what it can do, but what it will do. Does Israel have the will to go after Hamas full force? Here's the dilemma as the Israelis see it. Go back to war? Some hostages won't survive. The Israelis will be careful where and how they attack, but some might die from Hamas mistreatment, some might be murdered by Hamas, some might be killed by accident. Or end the war for now, let Hamas survive, and bring back the remaining hostages. Those who favor ending the war say, we can go after Hamas later in a year or two. This belief comes from the political left, from the center left, from the center, think Benny Gantz and his National Unity Party, even from some on the political right, think Yoav Gallant, a former defense minister. They believe Israel needs to destroy Hamas, but they are willing to wait. The people holding these views are not naive peaceniks. This is General Benny Gantz, former IDF head, General Yair Golan, head of the left-wing Democrats Party, former deputy IDF head, Yoav Gallant, former general, head of the Southern Command and defense minister. They believe that IDF promised its soldiers that if they are captured, the IDF will stop at nothing to get them back, and that this promise is a source of Israeli strength. They understand that this attitude is why Hamas took hostages, because they are valuable currency, and they will cut a bad deal anyway. A side story about Yair Golan. There were many heroes on October 7th, where the slaughter would have been much worse. He was one of them. On the morning of October 7th, he heard the news, picked up his gun, put on his uniform, and drove south on his own to do what he could. He ended up taking multiple trips into the Nova Festival to bring partygoers out and save maybe a dozen people. But back to the Israeli choice. Most Russian Israelis, whom we know, and my wife is a Russian native speaker, so we know a lot, strongly disagree with the hostages first strategy. They think it's nuts. They think Israel already released too many terrorists for the 25 live hostages we got back last time. They were a minority for the last release, despite that price. But the price that time didn't include losing the war for now. So far, Netanyahu is insisting he won't leave the Philadelphia corridor or let Hamas return to power. Bezalel Smotrich, the head of the religious Zionist party, has said he will leave the government and force an election if Netanyahu caves into Hamas. He means it, or so Netanyahu believes, and so I believe. For the middle of the Israeli public, support for hostages first varies over time. The support for we must fight to win first went up with the tragedies of the last release. The murder of Shiri Bibas and her two little kids, the release of emaciated hostages, a Gaza crowd cheering the turnover of the Bibas coffins, and a crowd ready to attack live hostages at an earlier ceremony. Hamas reminded us of who they are. So did the Gazans who attended the ceremonies. The tension and the agony is real. Some Israelis on either side can talk to each other about it. Too many only yell at each other.
Bernie, can you talk about the Israel missile defenses, clarify what they are? We hear about the David Sling, Arrow, and so forth. What do they do respectively?
So Israel has a multi-layered defense system. The Iron Dome, which is what you've heard most about, is against short-range rockets, the kind that Hamas had. There is also the mid-range David Sling system. There's the longer-range Arrow system. What this has to do with is a rocket goes like this. If it goes higher up, Iron Dome can't reach it. So you need different types of missiles to intercept different incoming missiles. All of them worked. We didn't know that before because nobody was shooting middle and longer range rockets at Israel. They were tested. They mostly worked. Not 100%, just like the Iron Dome isn't 100%, but they mostly worked, and we know that they'll work the next time if Iran shoots missiles at Israel again. I should say also Israelis are returning to the north. There is a ceasefire with Lebanon. It appears to be holding. It looks like the Lebanese army is willing to take some action against Hezbollah and has the strength to do so. We hope that continues. Remember that Israel evacuated the north in 2006 in the Second Lebanon War. And then the war ended and the people came back. They are gradually coming back today. The schools are open, and I predict that they will gradually return. The Druze in the north were always Israeli supporters. They are stronger supporters now. They haven't forgotten that a Hezbollah rocket killed a dozen kids playing soccer in Majd al-Shams. The Israeli government is working as it should to support the Druze in northern Israel and in southern Syria.
Tell us about the Haredim.
The Haredi, for my money, are a huge problem that has to be solved. It won't be solved under the current government, but it must be
To
solved.
clarify, the ultra-Orthodox who do not
Yeah.
serve, and I've heard that those who've been called to do something are agreeing or showing up in vanishingly small numbers.
Yeah, so the Haredi are not the same as the Hasidim in the U.S. The Hasidim are too moderate for the Haredi tastes. The Haredi want other Jews to fight. Well, they don't. They want other Jews to pay higher taxes to support their large families, while the men don't work and don't fight. They can't hear or pretend not to hear the anger against them across the political spectrum, from the far left to the far right. Everybody thinks, we need your men to serve in the military too. Israel needs more soldiers. The Haredi leaders say, not our problem. Between 400 and 500 Israeli soldiers were killed fighting Hamas and Hezbollah after October 7th. The Haredi leaders say, not our problem. We will pray for your soldiers, but we won't send our sons to fight with them. Israel needs to finance a larger military budget for at least the next decade. The Haredi leaders say, not our problem. We need more state subsidies to pay for our men to stay home, study Torah, and not serve in the military. Too few Haredi voices are calling for change. Too few Haredi are showing up when drafted. When and how that ends, I don't know, but it must end, or Israel will not survive in the form we now know it.
The other thing we're always thinking about is the possibility, if there still is one, of a two-state solution.
The view of many Israelis, I think from the left to the center right, is yes, but not soon. Maybe, but not soon. Much will turn on whether and when the Palestinians decide they prefer peace prefer their own state on some of the land that the British once called Palestine, to the fantasy of expelling or killing the Jews. That hasn't been the Palestinian view since 1948. It isn't the Palestinian view today. Maybe one day it can become the Palestinian view, and then we can have separation and a true Palestinian state. The Biden administration said they supported a separate Palestinian state governed by a, quote, reformed Palestinian Authority. They never explained what reform meant. Netanyahu claimed that Fatah, the governing political party in the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, Yehuda v'Shamron, as more and more Israelis are now calling it, was no better than Hamas. Recently, Israel's foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, was asked, what would it take for Israel to work with Fatah? His conditions were, one, stop the pay-for-slay policy that rewards the families of terrorists whom Israel kills or captures. Second, teach your children to coexist with Jews instead of teaching them to hate Jews. And third, stop inciting terror in ways large and small. But Sa'ar added correctly, Fatah is not interested. From a Mahmoud Abbas speech a month ago, which was meant not to be recorded, but a recording leaked out, after Fatah claimed it was going to stop pay for slay. Quote, if we have one penny left, it is for the prisoners and martyrs. Martyrs meaning the terrorists whom Israel killed. They must receive everything as it was in the past, and they are more precious than all of us. The Oslo idea of trading land for peace only works if the other side will go along with the trade and not just take the land and use it to launch more war. That hasn't been true since Oslo. Very few Israelis will gamble that it will become true soon. I think it's interesting to listen to Yair Golan, head of the main left-wing Israeli party. He wants a two-state solution. He believes that annexing the West Bank would be a disaster for Israel. But he also wants Israel's control of the borders around Gaza and the West Bank, military freedom of movement to track down terrorists anywhere and anytime. Full Palestinian sovereignty can wait. And this is the left-wing pro-peace edge of the Israeli public. For most Israelis, first we need a reformed Palestinian government, truly reformed. Then we need to wait 20 years for the effects of a different way of educating children to take hold. Then we can talk. Maybe then the Palestinians will support a peace deal. They didn't in 2000 under Clinton. They rejected the Omer plan in 2008. They wouldn't even negotiate over the Trump-Kushner plan in 2020. Israelis have learned. A recent poll, nonpartisan poll, said that 85% of Israeli Jews saw no prospect of a peace deal, quote, for the foreseeable future. In that sense, Hamas has won. Hamas fought a two-state solution for 30 years. They want one state with no Jews. After October 7th, they have won the battle against two states for decades to come, at the cost of losing the war. The Israeli settlements in the West Bank will continue to expand. Quickly or slowly, we don't know, but they will expand. Someone needs to tell the Palestinians that the terms of a peace agreement will continue to get worse over time.
Let's talk about the Bibas family. Yarden Bibas was featured on a 60-minute segment I believe it was last Sunday. It was very powerful. He's not the only one. He's the father and husband of the little boys, Bibas, the redheaded boys, Ariel Kfir, and the husband of Shiri Bibas, all killed in Gaza by Hamas. So what would you say about that situation?
There are a number of individuals who have become symbols of the tragedy of October 7th and of Israeli resilience. One of them is our own Yonah Brief, the grandson of the former rabbi of this congregation. He lost both legs, was in intensive care for over a year, and finally died when his liver failed. Hirsch Goldberg Polin, who was killed by his captors along with 5 other hostages rather than let the Israelis find them. Eli Sharabi, who emerged from a year and a half in captivity, where he nearly starved to death, learned that his family was killed on October 7th and had the strength to begin a world tour to support rescuing the hostages still in Gaza. But I think none loom larger than Shiri Bibas and her two little kids. Ariel, age 4, Kafir, less than 1 year old. Taken hostage, murdered in captivity. Her parents were killed on October 7th as well. Her husband, Yarden, survived. For Israelis, the Bibas family represents their families. This is what Hamas would do to them if it could. This is what too many Palestinians would do to them if they could. And the Israelis know this. And this is very close to many Israeli hearts.
Talk of the Trump plan.
So a couple of months ago, President Trump announced a vision for the future Gaza. I don't even want to call it a plan. It didn't have details. He said correctly, most of Gaza is thoroughly destroyed and cannot be rebuilt while people are living in the mostly destroyed cities. He said correctly that rebuilding will take many years and massive amounts of money. He didn't say, but we know, that no one will provide that money while Hamas remains in control. No one will rebuild Gaza, only to see it destroyed again the next time Hamas attacks Israel, as it is promised to do, quote, again and again. Trump's vision was that the Gazans would voluntarily leave for other places where they could build better lives. Once many of the people are gone, destroying Hamas is easier. Destroying their military and governing power. Then rebuilding can start. Some of the leavers might later return. If Gaza is rebuilt successfully, many will not. Many people say this is a crazy fantasy. I'm not so sure. Suppose plausibly that half of the Gazans would leave if they could. We need countries willing to take 1 million refugees. That shouldn't be Jordan, which can't absorb more Palestinians. But Egypt could, other Arab countries could. The countries who proclaim support for the Palestinians can be pushed to back up their words with action. We remember that before the Holocaust, no Western country would take the Jews who wanted to escape from Europe. After the Holocaust, no Western country would take the survivors. Those Jews went to Israel instead and built a nation. And today, no one wants the Gazans, not their hypocritical supporters in Ireland, Norway, Spain, Brazil, Colombia, you name it. If half could leave, what about the other half? Well, some can live in the non-destroyed parts of Gaza. Maybe 500,000 would end up in tents for years. So be it. The Israelis who came, the Jews who came to Israel after World War II, lived in tents for years. Trump's vision challenged the Arab nations to develop a better idea, because after all, he's right that Gaza is mostly destroyed. He's right that it can't be rebuilt while people are living in the destroyed areas. He's right that it'll take many years and massive amounts of money. They have failed. Their most recent fantasy is Gazans can remain trapped in Gaza because nobody wants them. Hamas can be ignored, and money for reconstruction will magically appear. That won't work. Many Israelis hope that Trump's vision can succeed, at least in part. But one way or another, we need a plan for rebuilding Gaza after the act of fighting ends, and we don't yet have that.
Say, Bernie, about the tents, the Ma'abarot in Israel that refugees were in for years at times, tents and then tin shacks, kind of.
Yep.
Those were primarily around the founding of the State of Israel, Declaration of the
Yes.
State of Israel, from Jews from Arab lands, Jews who were refugees and kicked out of Arab lands after Israel was established. So, yeah.
Yes, I think many people don't remember or didn't know. There weren't enough buildings in Israel to support The 2 million refugees from Europe, from Arab countries, who came flooding in over a short period of time. So Israel built tent camps, and eventually the tents got replaced with tin shacks, and after more years, people moved to other places. But that was a long process.
Yeah, Ronia Gross was in one of those Malba roads, actually, from Iraq with her family. So talk about the Arab country, Israeli Arabs.
Let me say something else first. I want to put to you the following about what's good for the Gazans. If you care only about peace and a good life for the Palestinian Muslim Arabs, you should be pro-Israel and anti-Hamas. You should want Israel to decisively defeat Hamas, while trying to minimize civilian deaths, as it is doing, imperfectly to be sure. You should support Gazans being able to voluntarily leave with a right of return, just like refugees from any other country at war. There are few Palestinians who are saying things like this. I wish there were more. But okay, Israeli Arabs, what are their views? This, for me, is quiet, super important, and good news. You do not hear about revolt from Israeli Arabs. It's not there. There are some terror attacks inside Israel, more than before October 7th, but almost all come from West Bank Palestinians, not the Israeli Arabs. The Israeli Palestinians don't love the Jews, but they aren't trying to kill Jews either. And that's really important. It tells me that peace is possible if you can educate your children not to try to kill the Jews. If Palestinians outside Israel can be raised from childhood to want their own country more than they want to kill the Jews, we can get to separation into a separate Palestinian state. It won't be fast, it won't be easy, it'll take occupying Gaza, it'll take a generation. Many Israelis see no quicker way. And if that approach succeeds in Gaza, then we can try it in the West Bank.
Just a couple more things to comment on. Bibi Netanyahu, his position and reputation, poll numbers among Israelis.
I wanted not to talk about Israeli politics, but it's hard to avoid. There are a minority of Bibyists for whom he can do no wrong. There is another minority who suffer from Bibi derangement syndrome, from whom he can do no right. And there are many in the middle who agree with many of his actions, but distrust his motives and don't believe a word he says, who haven't forgotten the political divisions from the pre-October 7th judicial reform campaign, who won't forgive Netanyahu for the bungling that led to the Hamas war, and perhaps even more for his failure to take any responsibility. And that is a problem. Israelis are deeply divided politically. There are pro-hostage release, anti-Bibi, anti-judicial reform demonstrations nearly every day. But there's another side. Many Russian Israelis oppose the demonstrators, the Kaplanists, they call them, because many demonstrations start at Kaplan Square in Tel Aviv. They are furious about foreign funding of the protests, some of it coming from US NGOs. There will be an Israeli election next year, 18 months. It'll be an important election with unknown outcome. And that's all I want to say about Israeli politics. I have opinions, I have many opinions,
Okay.
But not for today.
Okay, then finally, situation in the United States among US American Jews.
So I wanted to talk about Israel, not the US, but let me break my own rule a little bit. Many of us, many American Jews, are breathing a sigh of relief at the visible anti-Semitism of last spring. The demonstrations, the university encampments have receded. I'm worried that they, and perhaps we, are too complacent. My own example, I gave a talk similar to this here last year. I then gave it at Northwestern Law School. So I said this year, do you want me to do it again? I'll come. The Northwestern Jewish Law Students Association said, we're not interested. I asked Northwestern Hillel. They said, we don't think the students will come. I'm much more worried than the students. I remember when synagogue doors were not locked, when we didn't have armed guards for religious services, when it was unthinkable to have openly anti-Semitic members of the Senate or the House of Representatives. And I wish the college students had that memory of how much worse it is today, or how much worse it is now in much of Europe.
Just before you go on, you didn't mention how you were not merely declined this year, but how you were literally canceled last year. Do you mind talking about that?
Last year, my remarks, which some of you may remember.
Not canceled by us.
Right. I talked here, I talked at Northwestern, I arranged to talk at Columbia. I was canceled. My talk was canceled by the administration.
And that's your alma mater, is it not?
I taught there.
You taught there,
Right.
Columbia, New York.
I arranged to give a talk at University of Chicago. My talk was canceled by the law school dean. It's too controversial. Maybe I should try again, if any was interested. So let me finish this way. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, full stop. If we are not clear about this, no one else will be. If you are against the existence of the State of Israel, which is what anti-Zionism means, you are anti-Semitic and pro-genocide because the Jews in Israel are a majority of the land called Palestine. They are refugees from other countries or descendants of refugees. Most were born there. They have nowhere else to go, do not plan to leave. This is their home, their homeland, and ours. I'm Yisrael Chai.
I'm Yisrael Chai.
B'yachad nanatzeach. Thank you.
Together we will be victorious. B'yachad. Thank you. We have time for a couple questions. I'm insisting on questions as opposed to comments or commentary. So would anyone like to ask anything of Bernie at this time? Comprehensive discussion. Alona.
Louder, please.
I'll repeat it.
Hamas was rebuilding tunnels. From your comments, it looks like they're kind of retreating. So that seems to be, that doesn't sound true.
I'll repeat it for the folks at home. The news that Hamas is rebuilding tunnels, whereas you've talked about them retreating militarily, at least, so that there's a contradiction there.
So there's no doubt that Hamas used the 6-week ceasefire to rebuild what they could, to try to repair tunnels, but they have no concrete. They have no machines. There's only so much you can do digging by hand. Are they trying? Sure, they're trying, right? But there's only so much they can do, and they can't rearm. And without rearming, at some level, I don't know how much it matters if there are a few more tunnels or a few less tunnels.
Others? We talk a lot, Bernie, about, you talk about Hamas being weakened in various ways, but we also talk about like how the war could have also breeded more terrorists because of the devastation to Gaza, which is not something that we're disputing. So if it has breeded all that resentment among young people, then Hamas or something like Hamas will, of course, emerge or re-emerge. So the mere degrading of Hamas now does not necessarily mean a degrading of the sentiment that Hamas represents, or the organization, or the power, and the violence that it can inflict. Do you agree with that, or is that a real problem, or is maybe the demonstrations maybe showing that people of Gaza are turning?
I think the people of Gaza, many of them, not all, right? Hamas doesn't have to recruit everybody, it just has to recruit a minority, have discovered just how bad it is if you go out and try to attack Israel, because they will attack back. I don't know that the Palestinians in the West Bank have learned that lesson to the same extent, because they haven't been destroyed to the same extent. And so I'm now, in a way, more worried about Islamic radicalism in the West Bank than I am in Gaza. And that's kind of why I said, you know, if you want to rebuild in Gaza first, change the education system in Gaza first. If it works there, then you can try it in the West Bank. Because for the Israel to walk away from the West Bank is much, much more dangerous to Israel. And so there's logic in going and seeing what you can do in Gaza first. And is it possible to re-educate? I think so, right?
It's a big question.
We hope so. Israel can't do it. The Saudis can do it. The UAE can do it. Egypt could do it if it wanted to. Israel needs a partner, needs somebody else to be in day-to-day control. And then we'll wait 20 years and then we'll see what happens.
Erwin, last question.
Just on economically, though, I'm in travel and tourism is devastated looking for years, so
Okay, yeah, Israel's economy, including the fact that tourism, which is a big part of Israel's economy, is obviously very depressed.
Surprisingly, Israel's economy is doing quite well, thank you, better than many would have thought. The tech sector is still strong. The Israeli stock market, look, I haven't checked the last 2 days, but it's above where it was before October 7th. Israel can afford to fund the military that it needs to fund. And the tourists will come back. The tourists will come back. They aren't there this year. They weren't there last year. But the attraction of being in Israel is still there. That's a temporary blip. So I'm not worried about the Israeli economy.
Yeshar Koach, Bernie Black, and thank you so much. Toda rabah.